Coming up with This Week in Computer Hardware, a tough week for graphics drivers for NVIDIA and AMD. Synology's DS1019 Plus NAS reviewed, EVGA's new sound card. Got a review on that too, DLSS updates and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 504, recorded on February 14th, 2019. We found a new sound card and graphic driver growing pains. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Hover. Register a domain name and build your online brand with Hover. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH Weekly Show that aims to bring you all the hardware news. And this week, we have driver pain. You know who's going to talk about the pain of graphics drivers with us? Ladies and gentlemen, PC Purse, Sebastian Peak. Sebastian, are you alive, sir?
I'm alive. You may hear that I've been battling a cold, but yes, I have also been experiencing the pain that is graphics drivers. And the pain of a week in which graphics driver updates were one of the top stories. So that gives you an idea of how this week has been. How are you doing, Patrick?
You know, I am full of mirth and good cheer. I'm in the process of getting in a stack of Western Digital drives to test port link aggregation using multiple Ethernet ports on a NAS. And I bring that up because you're going to talk about Synology's DS1019 Plus, one of Synology's latest NASs. We should probably take a moment to talk about something that's going to happen several minutes after we finish This Week in Computer Hardware. NVIDIA's earnings report is going to come up, which we're not particularly excited about because financials, although it's been a particularly rough couple of quarters for NVIDIA because, oh my goodness, it turns out crazy, coin mining actually did help them sell a lot more video cards last year, a lot more GPUs last year. But also, I think more importantly, if the crew at videocards.com, videocards.com.
Yeah, it's with a Z or Z.
With a Z. We had talked about their rumors around the GTX 1660, and now if you go up to the website there, you'll see a bunch more pictures. An exclusive first look at the GTX 1660 Ti from MSI, and pictures of chips and just sparkling amounts of excitement. And what looks like, if it's legit, an interesting card. And I'm very, very curious to see what the pricing is. So in theory, we may or may not find about that several minutes after the podcast ends. And if we do find out about that several minutes after the podcast ends, we'll get digging into that next week. Shifting gears dramatically from a mythical card that may or may not ship. That chip is beautiful. All chips are beautiful.
I'm like you. I think the big story is going to be pricing. That's the one thing. Like, it seems like every detail imaginable has been posted all over the internet about this thing.
Right.
But we haven't heard anything about pricing, so that's going to be the big reveal.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. I mean, it seems like it's a little. I can affectionately say detuned from a RTX 2060. Is that 25% fewer CUDA cores?
You know, Patrick, I have not done the math on that. I will defer to your estimates.
Hold on. I have the internet and I have the modest ability to do math.
It's basic mathematics using a computer.
Basic mathematics. We don't want to get too fancy because as soon as I get into fancy math, we rediscover why I was not an engineering student in college and why I majored in literature. There it is. Also, I just want to say to all hardware vendors, quit hiding the specs, please. It's really irritating.
Just scroll down the page and then go to like 3 tabs over.
And hit select all tabs. Or no, display. The one I love is like when you display the specs and then you scroll to the bottom and it says display full specs and you scroll to the bottom of that. And then things get really crazy. So the 2060 has 1920 CUDA cores. which is a fair bit more than 1536. That obviously would impact rendering speed for 3D games. And man, because the CUDA cores are essentially kind of the key to performance. I feel comfortable in saying that, although it's not everything in performance.
Well, yeah, it's the key to compute. So if I mean you have this, they're saying it's the same memory bandwidth, but obviously with fewer cores, you're probably going to be targeting lower resolutions. The 2060 is all about 1440p gaming, so I would imagine if this comes out and has fewer cores, this is probably going to be like a 1080p, like high ultra setting 1080p kind of card.
Much to the shock of any of a number of educators that influenced me, I did do the math right in my head. It was 25% fewer cores.
Wow.
So
off the top of your head,
you know, sun shines even on a dog's ass once in a while. The I'm curious, like, you know, you just went over this pricing. Pricing is going to be really interesting, and
that's the
is
key.
Definitely smelling like a 1080p card. Jim Tanis over at PC Per got deep into Synology DS1019 Plus. The numbering kind of confused me, and then I realized, well, they used, you know, the 918 Plus for the 4-bay box last year, so 9 plus 1 equals 10.
Yes,
the Plus series on this is less about, say, if memory serves, the Plus on this is going to be lots and lots of capacity and performance for small businesses and if you're a pretty hardcore home user, but not necessarily if you need to transcode 4K video to other devices in your house. Not that I actually know anyone with a NAS that uses their NAS to transcode 4K video for smaller devices in their house, but I hear that a lot from various NAS vendors.
I think all you have to do is scroll down on, like, if you're reading Jim's review and see how he does attempt to do just that, where he installs Plex and sees how many simultaneous 8 megabyte per second streams or 8 megabit per second streams he can support with software transcoding. But yeah, this is that like SMB NAS that we saw before that was a 4-bay model from Synology, and this is the 5-bay model. Almost identical specs. I mean, pretty much identical specs. The same Celeron J3455 processor, the same 4 gigabytes of memory. Well, okay, the 918 came with 1 by 4 gigabyte, and this one comes with 2. So there's the big difference there. Same limitation, though, with the Ethernet, which is it's just 1 gigabit Ethernet. So, and there's 2 of them. So you could potentially aggregate 2, 1 gigi to have a 2, gigi connection, but that requires, as you are discovering and still researching, specialized equipment and a setup tailored for that.
I will affectionately say, at consumer prices, it is fundamentally impossible to create a bonded pair out of the 2 or 4 Ethernet jacks on the back of most NAS boxes. ... But they will split multiple loads across individual NAS ports if you connect them all to your devices. You can certainly get into bridging them if you're willing to pay the expense of a NAS that will support it, because a lot of what I discovered is a lot of consumer vendors are selling high-end routers but can't actually stipulate whether or not it's messy. Short answer is you can probably split those. The router itself will, like, if you have multiple connections to the NAS from different devices in your house, it'll be like, hey, you go on this port, you go on that port. The networking side of it is a hot mess in the consumer world. I'll just leave it at that. A disappointingly hot mess, because some boxes that say they're doing it don't do it in a way that actually seems to work with any other hardware manufacturer. But that's is just irritating. Do you see a lot of people using 10 gigabit Ethernet, or is that more forward looking, where you want a device that will support the next generation of networking as you upgrade to it?
I think very few, obviously, are actually on 10 gig E. If you were like a power user, or if I know the previous office, everything was 10 gig E because we were sharing files across the office from workstation to workstation. And it just became, when it's faster to use SneakerNet and a fast USB drive, then yeah, your network's the limitation. And to the point where wireless technology has surpassed like single gigabit wired networking. Mm-hmm. So the thing about this product, though, is it has the potential for such high performance because it has this and the previous version, the 4-bay version of this, the DS918. You have two M.2 slots on this where you can add high performance NVMe solid state drives and have ultra high performance caching where you just tremendously increase throughput and diminish the response time to the point where it's screaming for a faster interface than 1 gig E can provide. But I don't know. It's an interesting product from them because Synology offers a unit. The 1500 series is actually the 1600 series. It has a 6-bay, so an additional bay for $100 more, but you're also getting a PCI Express slot, so you could add a 10 gig E card. So there's no way to add 10 gig E to this NAS, and it's $649. So you're paying $100 premium over the 918 to get that extra drive bay and 4 gigabytes of additional memory. So I mean, there is the value there. And you can do hardware transcoding, but with that Celeron, it's pretty much like 2 streams at good quality simultaneously. If you had any designs on using this for like a Plex server. So for a single user or a couple of users within the same home, it's fine. But you need more CPU horsepower, and really you need a fatter pipe to get this onto your network to justify, such things as, massive amounts of dedicated NVMe cache, for example. Mm-hmm. So,
well, that doesn't sound frustrating at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they added a bay and they added more memory, and you are paying for it, but it's not. It's just interesting that they don't have the ability to do what the higher end models can do. So there is differentiation, but the pricing being like $100 apart from these models, I would personally get the 1600 series myself and have the option of future upgradability to 10 gig E. And, I saw Serve the Home release the review of this morning as well. It kind of came to the same conclusion. It's like, the limitation is really just the interface at this point, because this thing can significantly outperform 1 gig E. And you're gaining flexibility with RAID configurations with the 5 bays, certainly. With additional redundancy, you can add that 5th drive. But
it's frustrating because I think everybody loves the Synology Disk Manager, or I should say Disk Station Manager, the software that runs this. It's stable. It doesn't have a lot of the issues that we've seen from some other offerings. They've got some really good basic options that are fairly affordable when you look at whether you're talking about something like the DS418 Play or the DS418, but they're also at this point where they're just I'm finding it takes a astonishing amount of time to count the number of offerings they have between the J series, the Value series, the Plus series. There's obviously as you get into the sort of the high end stuff, like an FS 1018, that's a 12-bay NAS. You're not going to be using that in the home, but I'm counting somewhere in the neighborhood of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 26 NAS options just between the Plus series and the Value series and the J series.
That's a lot.
That's feeling like, I mean, Ryan and I went through this period of pain, I want to say 2 springs ago, when Intel released a new chipset and every motherboard manufacturer dropped like 34 motherboards. And at some point, you're just looking at this and shaking your head and going like, I get you want to have all the segments covered, but it was just so unhinged. And it's at some level, it gets really confusing. Now, you could probably eliminate a lot of these because, okay, there's probably no consumers that are going to buy, a 15 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 bay NAS for home. I know some of you out there listening to This Week in Computer Hardware are like, I have 2, but you're on the far end of the bell curve. You're not in the fat middle bell curve. But I don't know. I just feel like there are so many options at this point. It's gotten terribly confusing and terribly subtle. And, when you look at that, it's like, oh, we've added the NVMe. Anyhow, soapbox shoved back into the corner. A little less complication, I think, would be helpful. I also have 2 of their NASs in a closet over there, so I am for the most part a very happy Synology user. So it's good stuff, except when you can't reach the performance potential of the thing you are testing.
Yeah,
EVGA Supernova 6. Oops, sorry. You're saying?
Go ahead. I just said that's the frustration. Exactly.
Yeah. EVGA Supernova 650GM modular SFX power supply review. This looks like a power supply that doesn't have water or LEDs, and I'm just delighted.
Yeah, it's just a power supply, Patrick. But it's an SFX power supply, so it's that most diminutive of power supply form factors. Not SFXL, just SFX with the 92 millimeter fan. And EVGA, I think these were announced back in October. So these have been on the market since the end of last year, beginning of this year. But just in case you missed it, yes, EVGA, which has been like a go-to brand for a lot of people. They've been like a absolute monster in the price performance category. Like if you were building an inexpensive PC, it's hard to go wrong with EVGA power supplies. You can find them like bronze-rated power supplies with enough power to get you going on like a $400 or $500 PC build for like $25, $30.
Right.
And they work reliably. So they have entered with 3 different models in the SFX line, and the prices range from $100 to like $130. And like actual street prices, I think for the 450 watt is closer to 100 than this 109 MSRP. But what Lee found, and he puts it through its paces, decent performance. Like I think he wanted a little bit tighter voltage regulation, but everything was within standard. Nice short cables, which is good or bad. Like, he uses an ATX case, so he couldn't quite reach everything. But I think the use case for this is more that small form factor case, obviously, because very few larger cases are actually going to require you to use one of these smaller power supplies. And if they do permit it, very often they allow you to use one of the SFX-L variants, which will offer you a little bit quieter performance under load because of that larger fan. So this is one of those things, like if you have an enclosure that demands the small SFX power supply form factor, now EVGA gives you an option to go along with all their other ATX power supplies. So just a PSA, and it tested out well enough for Lee to give it a silver award, and he does not just bestow awards on anything. So very good entry into the market for EVGA.
Excellent. I'm very curious to see where these end up. I feel like there will be interesting builds coming in the near future. At least I hope. Pardon me while I attempt to choke to death on live camera. Metro Exodus, is this going to be the new traumatic, the next generation of GPU traumatizing benchmarks as they add the RTX features?
I don't really think so. And it's funny because looking over the previews, because of course sites that were given pre-release copies of the game, sites that cover game reviews as well, we've seen coverage about this already. The embargo must have lifted on like footage and reviews, obviously, a couple of days ago. The game comes out tomorrow, and not every game uses ray tracing. In fact, I don't think there's any commercial title that's using ray tracing throughout the entire like graphics engine, where the game engine in the case of Metro Exodus is using ray tracing just for like environmental light, like sun and sky. So the effect is quite subtle, where Battlefield 5 was using it for reflections. So, of course, every demo is trying to show you, like, look at the fender of the car, look at the explosion reflecting off of the metal and the chrome. And that's really cool, and it looks amazing with water reflections, too. This is a little bit more, like I said, subtle, where you're looking at, like, one of the stills I looked at showed a room, and there's, like, cracks in, like, the wall or ceiling, and then a window is open somewhere, and in like the localized light version, it just kind of gives you a soft glow coming from the corner where the window is. And in the ray traced version, you have more clearly delineated like areas of shadow and areas with light. So you can see where, oh, I guess you could hide in that corner because there's like a darker shadow there. But it's one of those things where when you have to look at still images and stare at them to see the difference, it's less compelling of a feature when you consider there is an inherent performance hit that you take to enable these features.
Right.
So, but what Tom's Hardware did, and they had the scoop on this, they were running DLSS versus ray tracing testing because the latest NVIDIA driver enables DLSS in this game and in Battlefield 5. And they're seeing that it's kind of interesting because like we saw with Port Royal, and we've talked about this, that you got like a 50% boost in performance enabling DLSS, which is NVIDIA's proprietary AI, deep learning assisted, super sampling / upscaling technology. And the performance improvements with Metro Exodus are only around 30% max. And Tom's was looking at still images and comparing them and showing that there was a reduction in visual quality with DLSS enabled. So it's either it's early days or the AI, like they need more training, but
that's not what it's supposed to do.
No, it's a little bit blurrier. Like the big focus of the DLSS demo at CES with Port Royal, because they had that going before it was released, was that it looked sharper because you can train the neural network to find the edges of objects, and you can leave those edges sharp and soften the rest of the image. So the overall effect of the object in motion was that it was a sharper object since the edges were not being blurred, and it looked a little bit better next to the like standard anti-aliased image next to it. But here, the entire image appears to be a little bit less sharp, and I think that's probably a result of it being rendered internally at a lower resolution, having to be upscaled, and maybe the upscaling is not quite to the level that it is with Port Royal, which is a very consistent experience. It's literally like on rails, like the whole thing is there's a set path, all the objects move along, and it's easier probably to train the AI on something like a fixed perspective benchmark than it is a game like Metro. So there is maybe some growing pains for the AI with DLSS there. Ray tracing effects still work and look very good, but do come with that performance penalty. So I am curious. The game has been pre-ordered. We will be using it to test DirectX 12 and then any relevant like ray tracing DLSS stuff in the future. But I mean, it looks really good in the screenshots.
Let's hope it's early days. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
because it would be really frustrating if these cards, if RTX never really, if I don't want RTX to be the 3D, I don't want RTX to be to GPUs what 3D was to television. Something that was very exciting and then just kind of fell off the.
Hey, you will take 3D TV away from certain people. Like, what am I trying to say? You will take it away from them over their dead body. Yes, from their cold dead fingers.
Fry their cold dead fingers. I understand, and I've had to explain to several people because effectively last year there were no more televisions that did 3D, and you would need a projector if you wanted to bring 3D into your lifestyle moving forward. And there was a lot of rage about that. And I just tell people to blame airbenders.
Yeah.
Which is not entirely accurate, but is way more accurate than it probably should be. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by Hover. Building your online brand never been more important than buying a domain name for your passion. It's the first and biggest step to building your personal brand online, a brand that you own, that you control, that can't just disappear because somebody changes their mind at some big social media service someday. Keeping your domain name separate from your hosting, it gives you flexibility so you can choose the right platform for your business. No one wants to be stuck with a solution that doesn't meet their needs. And who doesn't need a domain name? Nowadays, it seems like everybody's got one. Your domain name, you want to stand out. You want your domain name to stand out. Hover has over 400 domain extensions to choose from. One of the more interesting ones, if you haven't seen it, the .me top-level domain. .me, it's a unique extension to use for your portfolio to showcase who you are and what you do. And if you've got a portfolio website ready to launch, you should get the .me extension. Hover offers best-in-class customer support team, no upsells. Have you ever tried to buy something and you had to say no to 27 increasingly obscure and oftentimes more expensive features that made no sense to you? No upsells, clean, simple user experience and interface, personalized email that matches your domain to further support your online identity. And the Hover Connect feature allows you to connect your domain name to many website builders with a few simple clicks. Make it easy. I like it when things are easy. It's not that I don't enjoy the arcana of dealing with, DNS servers and my domain name and my host provider, and it's just Hover's trying to make your life simpler and keeping your domains managed without bursting into tears. Who wants to cry? You don't want to cry this year. Find a domain name for your passion. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. That's hover.com/twit for 10% off your domain extension for a full year. And we want to thank Hover for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Oh, goodness. It's exciting to be looking at hardware right now. In part because we're curious to see what NVIDIA announces today, in part because Mobile World Congress is coming, in part because 5G continues to find new and exciting ways to drive me completely insane, but mostly because we are constantly on the search for an improved audio experience. We have
Indeed.
A disease, Sebastian and I. Actually, I ran out. I'm so glad I got that box as it was set on the porch because it has a set of KEF LSX speakers in it.
Oh, nice.
Powered speakers. And we literally just had about an inch of rain fall in about 45 minutes, blowing at a 45-degree angle. So I'm happy to say that the box is safe. You reviewed something that most people haven't thought about in a long time. You got a PCI Express sound card in for review from the crew over at EVGA.
In fact, it's in my hand right here. If the camera will focus on it, I'm actually on camera. And this is with the shroud. This is with the heatsink remove. This is just the bare card. I had taken it apart to take pictures of it and look at all the components. But it's right off the bat, I will say, this is expensive. I mean, it's on par with Asus has the Essence STX2 sound card, which is around a $250 card. $259, I think, is the MSRP. This is a $249 MSRP, so around the same. And this is all about 2-channel audio. So
it's priced like a premium audio, an entry-level premium audiophile DAC, or not a stupid overpriced audiophile DAC. I'm judging there because
and I think companies like is it pronounced FIO or FIO? I never know.
I usually say it's FIO, and I'm pretty sure that's
FIO.
wrong.
Okay, well, but that company, and companies like, and this is actually their name, of course. This is Shit Audio. They make products that are in that sort of $100 range that kind of defy audiophile conventions and say, like, this is an outstanding product for what it is, and you don't have to overpay, and you can buy a stack with a DAC and a headphone amplifier for $200.
I throw JDS Labs in that. I know those guys pretty well.
Yeah, and I've listened to. You've heard their stuff, right? You've heard some of their smaller DACs and headphone amplifiers and stuff.
Yeah,
and they've been getting better generation to generation. But yeah, when you're spending around $200, you can certainly do something external that's going to sound very good. There are a few interesting points about this, I think, and I'm sure you've had a chance to look over the specs. We've been talking about this since they announced it at CES. But in addition to supporting all the way up to like the highest bit rate and sample rate of linear PCM audio, 384, this also has native DSD support, multi-rate DSD, and it has very, very good components on the board. Like, it's been very thoughtfully designed, very well constructed, a very good line output. Like, the signal quality is excellent, very, very quiet, excellent signal to noise ratio, great dynamic range, all of those numbers that it hits on paper. And then when you actually demo this in person, like, I was running this through a pair of, modest, so-called audiophile style headphones. I have a pair of Audio-Technica ADH700Xs here, and they're okay. And they're only 38 ohms. They weren't really a challenge for the headphone amplifier on this thing. You could certainly drive much higher end headphones. I decided to put it to the test with a small stereo system. So I put together like integrated amplifier, grabbed a pair of speakers, and started listening to music straight from the RCA line output on this right into the back of the amplifier. And it sounded better than most of the full-size components that I have owned. It's just phenomenally good, wide, clear 2-channel audio coming out of this thing. And it was just, it didn't matter how loud I turned it up when I was listening with headphones. It was just like absolutely silent. I could not get this thing to, there was no distortion. So they've done a really good job. Like, when you actually look at the components that make up this sound card, it makes sense. Like, they went all out with very high end capacitors and resistors, and the op amps, which are swappable, are of good quality. I mean, they're absolutely, you can put in better ones, which is why they're in sockets. But right out of the box, this thing sounds phenomenal. And even though it is PCI Express, it was interesting. It is internally just a USB device. It has a bridge chip to connect to PCI Express, but internally, it is using one of those XMOS, those very popular like multiprocessors for the DSP. It gets its power via a SATA power input on the back of the card. So it's running not off of your motherboard, but off of your power supply directly, and it's got some pretty significant power. I think this thing puts up close to, it's either 7 or 8 watts it can put out. So significantly higher than what you'd get from one of those smaller like digital audio players, that sort of thing. And I've personally, for the last few years, used a little digital audio player as my like portable DAC and headphone amp off of my PC. And this is just like a different level of performance. Very, very impressive 2-channel sound. It just comes down to, are you interested in high quality 2-channel audio? Does like this price point from a company that's synonymous with like gaming, like motherboards, high performance graphics cards, they got into cases, they sell at least one laptop. So, for them to come out with a product that really sits squarely in the audiophile side of things is fascinating. Yeah, but I wonder how many people looking at this will see the price tag and just immediately dismiss it because it doesn't have like multi-channel surround and all of those things that you would associate with gaming.
I mean, I'd be really curious if if the audio reviewers pick it up, if some of the audio magazines do it. I remember digital audio didn't really arrive until Stereophile put like an Asus Zonar card, I think it was, on the front. And there was one before that I can't think of the name of. But there was in the space of a couple of years, they went from like vinyl till death to all of a sudden there were, audio cards, physical audio cards on the front of the magazine. And that was a big sign that, this digital thing wasn't going away anytime soon. But, compared to, if some of the objective measurement sites get a hold of this and it tests well, I mean, part of me is like, this sounds fascinating. And part of me is like, well, I already have a whole bunch of outboard USB-based or SPDIF-based gear that is delivering most of these features. But there's a lot of people out there who are looking for like full DSD playback and some of the more obscure stuff, or want to build a sort of audio workstation. Although it's kind of funny, a lot of the people who are willing to spend the money on that have also convinced themselves that this, anything inside the case can't possibly be shielded well enough to avoid the influence of EMI or other things or RF issues. But I'm curious. It sounds like it's nice when something claims to be something good and it actually lives up to its expectations. I particularly like AKM DACs. On one level, I understand that all DACs should sound the same, and on the other level, I think some DACs do a little bit better job than others. And I have at least 2 devices in my house right now with AKM DACs inside of them. I think they're pretty impressive. I also have some stuff with like some ancient Wolfson and Cirrus Logic DACs that sounds pretty impressive too. So I'm just happy it's
it's not just the components, it's obviously implementation.
Right.
And one of the things that was so frustrating to me, I bought a external creative sound card primarily because I was going to be doing some like ripping from vinyl, make high resolution copies of some of my analog records. And internally, the design of that X-Fi like HD card had dual oscillators. Like they were present on the board, but they were not enabled in software. So everything was being resampled to 48. And so none of the native like 44.1 variants like 88.2, which is a lot of the DSD masters that have been converted to LPCM or 88.2, 24-bit, it would have to resample those. And if you were playing like straight native, like I use Fubar 2000 or JRiver on any of my Windows systems. And if you have those configured with the Windows Audio Session Manager API for like a direct output, they just don't work if your device is not natively supporting the format that is being pushed out to it. So I was very pleased to see that this has 2 oscillators, so it handles both frequencies natively. It has a very high quality analog to digital converter as well, also from AKM. But interestingly, I found a Cirrus Logic ADC on the board as well. It turns out that one is dedicated to just the microphone input. So your line input is an AKM chip that can record natively up to the same 32-bit, 384 kilohertz that the output can, which is the first time I've seen that from a card like this. I've previously been limited to 24-bit, 96 kilohertz recording from a sound card. Some of them might go up to 192, but possibly just through like, interpolation. But very impressive components throughout, though, when you study the website has images like the close-ups of all the different component choices that they've made and the capacitors and that sort of thing. But ultimately, that means nothing unless it sounds good, and this does. But as far as objective measurements go, it was interesting at the suite at CES, we were seeing audio precision measurements, which were fantastic and rivaled, dedicated gear. I have not seen that like on the site. I think it's a different audience. I would love it if Stereophile did get this though, and then John Atkinson could do his thing. Yeah. And then we see
Audio Science Review. They're doing a ton of benchmarks these days.
Yes. Yeah. And then somebody just showing you those independent results to validate the performance. And I think this one would actually stand up quite well against gear. And when you think about it in audiophile land, $250 is nothing. It's to the point where there are people who would hear the price tag and say next because they're not interested in something so inexpensive. But for the average consumer, this is very expensive for a sound card when every motherboard has audio, and they, certainly there is room to question like the validity of a dedicated solution when motherboard audio has gotten better, et cetera, et cetera. But it really does take a critical ear. I don't actually think that the difference here between motherboard audio and this card is subtle at all. Mm-hmm. You will immediately hear a difference coming from most motherboard audio, primarily just with how clear and wide the sound is, because the channel separation from this is fantastic. But
well, also, I mean, it's also one of the things, if you don't have Spotify Premium, if you aren't running Tidal, if you haven't ripped your CDs to FLAC, if you aren't playing CDs, if you have a free streaming service, there's a pretty good chance that you don't have a lot of the musical information there that's going to come through your good headphones or your good stereo speakers and deliver the performance the hardware is capable of.
Yeah, and I will add just quickly, the other issue with adoption of a product like this, besides just the price tag, is that it does require a commitment on the part of the consumer to have high quality equipment to play it back on, whether that's a stereo and speakers,
right,
like a receiver or an amplifier, or if that means a dedicated pair of really high quality headphones. And there are some great headphones out there for under $100, but then again, like that $100 to $300 range of like entry level audiophile headphones, that is also adding to the cost of this. So if it makes sense for somebody who's already an enthusiast, who already has nice headphones, and wants to bring that to their PC, it makes less sense for the average consumer. Like you said, if they're listening to streaming music, like there's not a whole lot of channel separation or dynamic range to most music that's streaming over one of those services anyhow. So
we could talk about this all day because we email about it a lot. We should probably talk about, you talked earlier about the excitement of NVIDIA's driver stuff. NVIDIA's driver updates in terms of Metro Exodus and DLSS performance. What's going on? Do we have a final release driver for the Radeon 7? And do we actually have a date? In theory, I thought they were already selling Radeon 7s, but they don't seem to be on sale anywhere. And we also saw some numbers. I think it was another Video Cards article where they were like, Spain is getting 20 cards. And it seemed like a very
for the entire country,
tight launch.
So the launch definitely has it seems to have been very limited supply. We've heard numbers of anywhere from 5. We've the conjecture is 5 to maybe 10,000 units. That's we're just guessing. Clearly, availability is still virtually non-existent. We've third-party sellers on Amazon jacking up the prices. When I looked yesterday, there were 11 on eBay, which, I mean, when even the scalpers can only manage 10 or 11 cards, then there's not a whole lot to go around. But AMD.com was actually selling them directly like the night before last. I clicked on there was a link right on the home page. When you went to AMD.com, you could actually add it to your cart. So when they are available, then AMD is making them available, but it looks like they are rather slow to replenish. So they might be just manufacturing issues as they kind of mature the 7 nanometer process. But when the card actually was released, there were certainly questions about driver maturity. If you looked at early reviews, some of the outlets had major issues testing games, and I was apparently very lucky because the particular mix of hardware and software that I was using was not problematic for me. But the software has been updated again, and now we're up to Radeon software 19.2.2 for the Adrenaline 2019. And it's funny because right at the top of the list of support, where usually they're mentioning new games, like there's Far Cry New Dawn is on there, Metro Exodus, but the very top of the list, support for AMD Radeon 7. So it's like, oh, so this is the baseline. This is the driver that officially adds support for the Radeon 7. And if you look at the list of fixed issues, and I won't go down the whole list, it pretty much covers everything that people were complaining about prior to the release, like the press driver that went out with the card, there were issues with stability on X399 motherboards. There were issues with the software with Wattman, and there was like inaccurate reporting of temperatures or the inability to sustain an overclock of any kind. So it looks like stability and maturity have improved, and I can only imagine this will get better. Mm-hmm. But I would consider 19.2.2 to be like the first release of the driver for the card.
Got it. That's always a little awkward. But with so few cards out, it's not going to impact a whole lot of people.
You were an early adopter. If you got a card, you're one of the few, and your headaches are over for now.
Wow. It was interesting for me because we talked about it, and then I started digging around, and I found a couple of websites that did a fair amount of measurements on. And I'm trying to pull up the link right now. It did a fair amount of measurements, looking at Premiere, looking at scientific applications, some additional Blender benchmarks. And I got to say, if you are a Blender user, if you live in Blender, if you spend a lot of quality time in Blender, go over to techcage.com and take a look at the numbers they're running, because you will probably spend the rest of your week, month, and or year trying to find an AMD Radeon 7. I mean, it's also funny because I'm looking at this because we talked extensively last week about the sort of price performance, looking at price performance in the context of the 2080, the RTX 2080, and how it's a little, for the amount of money they're charging, it would be nice to have better gaming performance. And I'm very curious to see what happens, as the drivers get updated and as manufacturers maybe start to lean into this card on business, or I should say workstation applications, because some of the numbers, looking at Sysoft Sandra, it's looking at the numbers on this, it just it was like essentially spanking an RTX 2080 Ti. Maybe not by huge numbers, but it's a much more compelling number to be like, oh, this $700 card is 20% faster, more than 20% faster than this $1,100 card. But looking at like Blender numbers, it just seemed to be interesting how it was kind of all over the place. Where this is running almost as fast as a 2080 Ti in Blender. It's huge in Luxmark. And then in other applications, I'm very curious to see what kind of adoption takes place, for what kind of tuning takes place by sort of, content creation apps, workstation apps, engineering apps, and the drivers, and how that impacts performance for this card in the next few months. I also had no idea that most games, something I learned also, was that most games, I guess, have a soft cap of GPU memory usage at around 11 gigabytes, a la the 2080 Ti, which is something that sort of came out in a couple of the articles I read that I'd never heard before. So, I'm curious if that's something that, I don't think if that's removed, it's going to cause, any massive bumps in performance. But, something we keep coming back to is, boy, they updated the driver and look at those performance bumps. And boy, I want to see what happens as AMD updates their drivers, and as software manufacturers maybe start looking a lot more at AMD again as a, well, they make the Quadros, but this consumer card can really deliver some ridiculous numbers if we tune for it, or maybe it won't, but it would be nice.
And they had to clarify it too, because early in the week, on Monday actually, there were these reports coming out that AMD was going to unlock professional features, which would be unprecedented for the Radeon 7, that would otherwise be exclusive to their Pro Series cards. And you'd be able to run the Radeon 7 using the latest version of their Pro drivers, and then you'd have these workstation enhancements in effect. And then Tech Power Up had to publish a clarification of that when they got a statement from AMD the next day. So on Tuesday, we were getting news. I saw this on a non-tech and at Tech Power Up, that the new Pro 19.Q1 drivers that were coming out did indeed support Radeon 7, but with the added feature set disabled. So the benefit was simply that you could install the card without having to reinstall drivers, but you would still have the workstation enhancements and certifications and all of that sort of thing disabled, the same as it would be on the consumer driver. So,
right,
kind of much ado about nothing there, unfortunately. But it, like you said, I mean, it depends on the workload. But OpenCL performance with this card is fantastic. If you don't need like the pro level driver support, you can run this and just blow through various tasks. And sometimes when you look at it versus NVIDIA, you're looking at basically CUDA performance versus OpenCL. Sometimes they're just going head to head on a neutral playing field, and it's still a compelling option, especially because it offers really, really good gaming performance too. So there's that whole, I'm sure AMD's argument is, of course, this is not just a gaming card. This is for content creators, you know, work by day, game by night kind of thing. So
nothing wrong with that.
No.
I don't know. I'm also curious as somebody who bought an 1800X AMD Radeon 1800X AMD Ryzen 1800X processor, and then saw the price of that drop from $500 down to $300 as they released the 2700X. I'm very, very curious to see what kind of price elasticity is in place on the Radeon 7. And I'm also, I got to be honest, really, 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 really curious to see what they wring out of the next generation Navi processors that's come out later this year. Because boy, we have this huge challenge right now. If they can get the pricing solidified, or maybe they make a more consumer gaming friendly card, this is going to be a huge alternative to a lot of what's going on with the 2060, 2070, 2080, or the 2070 and the 2080, especially if RTX performance or ray tracing performance on games continues to be something less than spectacularly overwhelming. Or I should say something, if it doesn't become spectacularly, if it doesn't become less underwhelming, which is sort of a double negative, if it starts to not, I don't see, the demos look impressive, but a lot of
demos
games,
don't demos always look impressive though? Isn't that the whole point?
Oh my goodness, is that the whole point?
the issue that I see this year, and the last reports I saw about Navi was that it was going to be much later in the year, which doesn't surprise me. But there's a big gap right now. Like NVIDIA is probably going to be working at like filling holes and rounding out their lineup like they always do. They'll have something at every price point from $100 to $1,000. But AMD right now, they have the Radeon 7 at the very top for $700. And then you have to go back to the previous generation to the Vega 64 for like the next option down. And who knows if they will continue manufacturing those or for how long those will be available. And then right below that, you have the Vega 56. But then there's a drop off to the RX series cards. And at the top of the line is the RX 580 and 590. There's a faster variant. And it's not just a price difference. Like we were talking from like $200, $250 cards. Then you jump up to $400 cards. And you can find, as long as they're in stock and close to MSRP, you can find Vega 56s for like the $300 or so price point. And then the Vega 64s for around $4. But then you jump all the way up to $7. And it's just, they need something in between. They have the bottom pretty much covered. They need the mid, like the middle tier covered, that sort of $300-$400 range for something that's really solid for 1440p gaming. It does like, high settings, ultra settings, 1080p gaming and stuff. So that's where I'm curious to see them maybe release a slightly cut down version of maybe the Radeon 7 at a much lower price point. I would love to see Radeon 7 with only 8 gigabytes of RAM, if that would be possible, because a lot of that cost, we continue hearing this from different outlets as they review the card. It's said that 16 gigabytes of HBM2 it alone is over $300 to produce. So I can't imagine the margins on this card, even at $700, are that spectacular when they're giving you this much high bandwidth memory, but that's kind of what makes the card so interesting, is because the memory is so fast and there is so much of it. It's just like, how do you use it? And that's when the whole creative argument comes up yet again, and we go in circles and circles about this. But
yeah, I don't know what to tell you. It would be, we wait. That's all we can do is wait and wait and wait.
With bated breath.
Speaking of waiting, yeah, with our breath bated and our minds terribly, terribly eager. Anything you can tease about what's coming up on PC Per in the next week?
There's a lot of stuff coming. I mean, we have a lot of, interesting things on the docket. Like this, I've got a gaming laptop back here I'm looking at. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. So nothing in particular that really strikes me at the moment that I can talk about. But I guess we'll find out next week.
Good points. Oh my goodness. Shannon went on, got in depth on Google Password Checkup. It's a new Chrome extension that's designed to make life more secure for people with password repetition issues. It's kind of crazy. Well, you can go to techthing.com to learn more about that. But and we talked a bunch about the AMD Radeon 7 and the possibility of the 1660. Which we'll find out more about in 45 minutes or an hour and a half. And I got to say, we found all of the composite ports. Turns out TCL, LG, Vizio, and Sony all offer. What I didn't realize is a couple of those actually use a breakout. I think we may have talked about this last week. I'm obsessed with the fact that
this is something that was, I think, a Twitter thread.
Turns out there's a lot of TVs that will connect to your older consoles or your VCR should you have one.
Why would you want to do that to yourself? I mean,
it turns out there are a lot of
movies, that sort of thing, but
the VCR, yeah, I agree. Avoiding that is a wonderful idea. Vintage gaming consoles, though, it was interesting to see how many people responded to us telling me like, I use my vintage gaming console all the time, and it's amazing how good the upscaling is. So that was fun to read about. I
would like to know what TV they're using, if they're getting amazing upscaling from what is probably like a 320 by 240 image, because it looks like absolute garbage on my TV.
480i-ish. The one in question that the guy was particularly excited, he's got a Sony Bravia, fairly top of the line. And Sony, Sony's differentiating, Sony, for example, on their OLEDs are using the same panels that LG uses for their OLEDs. Sony's differentiating, their secret sauce, if you will, is the quality of their scalers and their backend processing. And also, as has been duly noted in any of a number of audio conversations, or for that matter, CPU upgrade conversations, one person's amazing is another person's meh. The responses are subjective, and I would be curious to see it, but I'm kind of banning myself from Craigslist because I keep finding speakers I want but don't need and cannot afford or fit anywhere in my house every time I go into Craigslist. So I'm not going on Craigslist to look for like a PS2 or a vintage Nintendo box so I can get all crazy with I have a projector that doesn't have a composite input, so I'm safe for the moment. So it is amazing to realize there's just a lot of vintage console gamers out there. More
there are, and I lust over things like the FrameMeister, which I believe is in the $200 to $300 range. That's the kind of ridiculous you get into, and I think I could just do all of this on like a Raspberry Pi for $35 or $40, but when you have the old hardware, you want to connect it to your new system, and then if you have a TV that does not have a good scaler, and that's a huge win for Sony if they're doing this effectively, but you can make some pretty ugly looking mosaic on your screen with some lovely like smeared edges, and it becomes almost an impressionistic view of what Mario might have looked like. But and then people go all out and get things like the FrameMeister, which is this sort of exotic high-end upscaler
the
that does
FrameMeister XRGB-Mini is $370.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks fantastic, but I don't know. There's a lot of stuff you can do for free on a PC that looks fantastic too. So it's like,
sure.
For old PC games, everybody uses DOSBox, it seems, unless you're crazy like me and have like 486 and 386 computers around. But upscaling that even on your monitor in front of you on your desk can look bad. And there's mods like the Pixel Perfect mod for DOSBox that make that look a lot better. And that doesn't cost anything. So it's a different kind of sickness. I try not to have every disease. I already have the audio disease that I've tried to come to terms with. And then I'm such a nut about image quality with my TVs that I actually got myself banned from Best Buy at one point because I was returning too many. And I can't go down the road of like obsessing over scaling. I have the old systems. I'm probably just going to give them to my son someday and just say, do whatever you want with these. If you sell them, don't tell me, because I cannot hook these up to one of my modern TVs and be happy. I have one CRT left that I connect them to, and it looks correct to me. But
period correct.
Yeah. You put it on the 65-inch TV in the living room, and it's like, oh, no, turn it off. No.
The pain. Oh. So if I see any 37-inch Sony Bravias on the curbs, I need to check them. So because it's a potential console life extender for you.
It was a sad day when Goodwill stopped selling CRTs. That's all I have to say.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to This Week in Computer Hardware. We call it TWiCH, and you can find all of our older episodes and information on how to subscribe at twit.tv/TWiCH. Of course, you can find Mr. Sebastian Peak over at PCPer.com. You can find me at TechThing and AVXL. And you can find both of us on the Twitters. Sebastian, what is your Twitter address?
It's very imaginative. It is at Sebastian Peak. So if you can figure out how to spell my name, you will find me on Twitter.
And I am at the ever so complicated to figure out at Patrick Norton. And we will entertain your hardware questions if you tweet them in our general direction, because that's the kind of guys we are, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
Thank you, Sue. Plus, there's a lot of you and two of us, and we learn a lot by you communicating with us. And we'll do our best to communicate with you, and we'll all be happy. I also want to say it's really weird because it was just hammering down raindrops the size of small animals, and now it is lightly raining, but the sun is painfully bright. So if I'm squinting, it's because the sun came out, despite the fact that it's still raining. Northern California, land of mythical weather. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Sebastian Peak.
We'll catch you next week on This Week in Computer Hardware, assuming Sebastian doesn't freeze.